When you show up to work, are you often guessing what you're supposed to be working on? Is your job description a laundry list of broadly defined duties? If so, you're not alone, and this episode is for you.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Thoughtful Talent Show. I'm Jen Werner of Jen Werner Coaching.
And I'm Chad Ahern of Talent Teams Consulting.
Today, as Chad alluded to, we're spending time talking about setting individual expectations and job crafting.
Before we get to the learnings, I know you and I have had some brief conversations prepping for this episode because it's a big topic.
Yes.
And I think one of the things that we found as we were discussing this is that you and I are coming at this topic from two kind of different lenses. I'm a little bit more analytical. You're going to hear my analytical, my deliberative, a little bit of my harmony in terms of practical solutions today. And Jen, I know that some of yours has probably been a little bit more like belief and maybe achiever or activator. I don't know which ones you're leaning on.
I think it's heavily executing, like individual contributor executing with that blend of like what that feels like from a relationship builder side. Yeah. So we definitely have some different voices on this one today, and I'm excited about where we're different. So Chad, do you want to start us out with some of your learnings about this specific topic?
There's some great stats around this to just sort of level set us, understand, help you understand why Jen and I are talking about this today. The biggest one, and all of these actually for today's episode come from Gallup. They are one of the biggest research points on this whole job expectations. But they find that only 50% of people strongly agree that they know what's expected of them when they're at work. 50%. That means half of your workforce is showing up not having a clue on what they're doing or what they're supposed to be working on. Alongside that, it's also worth noting that 64% of managers report that employees now have more or additional job responsibilities than they did. It's from just a couple years ago. That was a stat that Jen and I saw presented at the Gallup Summit back in June. And then the other a two-part statement. One is that 60% of employees say that the ability to do what they do best is very important to them at work, yet only 40% strongly agree that they actually have that opportunity to do what they do best every day. And as strengths coaches, always pay attention to allowing people to use their best talents and contribute their best every day at work. So I know that touches a little bit on our employee engagement that we covered in one of our previous episodes, but it comes back sort of full circle in this: how do we best set people up from the expectations side? So Jen, now that I've shared the stats, what do you want to share in terms of starting our conversation in on this topic?
I really think why we're talking about this, and for me, why it's important to me, is like from the standpoint of an employee. You know, we might be coming to a role. It might be new, or it might be, a role we've done for a while, but we come with an assumed expectation. We have our own expectations of ourselves in that role and what that looks like. We have our mostly assumed expectations of our employer, or say our manager or our boss. And then we have our expectations, again, assumed, of how we're going to work within the team. And so you see the key word there is assumed. These are all assumed expectations. Yeah. Rarely do our existing roles or even our new roles come with a very set of fully defined expectations. That, so from the past, we're bringing with us what we've done before, what's worked well with us, how we've worked well with another team. But these might not be the way that will work best in this role, with this company, with this manager, with this new team. And even just one person changing on a team, just one person leaving and a new person coming in can completely upset the apple cart, so to speak, and have you challenging the assumptions and the expectations that you have for your team, for yourself. So I think that's why this topic is really important to me. And I think it's important to us and our audience to help them learn about the communication styles and then being able to clear up some of this like assumptions that we're having.
I think that's really important. And, as you're saying that, I just immediately start thinking about some of the, I was in a role with my last sort of significant employer before I went out on my own as a coach, where I had the same job description for 7 years. In that 7 years, I had three different directors I reported to. Same job description, three very different sets of expectations about what exactly that job
Oh
description
yeah.
or what my goals were and how I was supposed to be achieving them. And so I think you said, one change on the team, even from the team member's perspective, upsets the apple cart a little bit. Now picture that happening when the key person moving in and out is the manager.
Oh
And
yeah.
so having the ongoing conversations to clear up the assumptions on both sides of that. As you said, you come with your assumptions. The manager is coming with their own assumptions of, oh, well, here's Chad's or here's Jen's or here's
Yep.
Jane Smith's job description. They must be doing X, Y, and Z. Well,
Right.
I've also been in the role for 7 years. I've also figured out some efficiencies and ways to make parts of my job description go a whole lot faster, and actually I can actually do more than say the
Yeah.
job description outlines. So I think that word you just brought up of assumptions is really key, because we all come into this with any job environment and any job role. We come in with those assumptions and thinking, oh, our manager's going to treat us this way, or they see their
Right.
goal as achievable in this way, but I'm seeing it in a different way. I think that's super key, and that's one place I would say I completely agree with you that's
Yeah.
you got to address those assumptions. That one of the other things that pops to mind is, I don't know how many job descriptions you've had that have had that wonderful phrase at the end of the job description, other duties as assigned. Well, what
Yeah.
exactly does that mean? What's the
Right.
assumption there? And how broadly do you apply that? The duties as assigned, does that mean I become the janitor in addition to being, you know, doing my main role? Um,
Right.
so I think there's a lot of clarity that's needed around how we set expectations and what those are and how we come to the right place.
Well, and I love you talking about that, like other duties as defined. So we're kind of getting into that, like what the job description like says specifically. And I
Yeah.
remember for me personally, I had one specific experience where I was hired as one like part of a role. It was a very cookie cutter job. Like it was pretty well
Yeah.
defined. There weren't a lot of these other job duties as assigned kind of language to it. But as I worked within my team with my leader, I realized that there were parts of things of the job that I did really well and other parts that I wanted to grow and actually learn more about. And I had a great team, a great leader who let me stretch, and grow into other things. So to replace me at some point, the job description would look completely different because now at this point they've morphed this what was a cookie cutter job description into something that we joked for a while that it should say hybrid at the end of it, because now I wasn't just doing one role, I was doing maybe three roles and across
Yeah.
the, like our hybrid cars, because that they were coming out pretty popular that when this happened, everything was being labeled hybrid. I was like, oh, well, I guess I'm kind of a hybrid too, because I had feet in extra roles. And,
Yeah.
if I'm being honest, I really hope that's what most businesses are doing with their people. They're realizing where their talents lie. They're letting them stretch and have those stretch opportunities to grow and learn and do more things than what just their job description says, as long as they're allowing them the appropriate time to do these things. As I think you could easily get to the place where you're just adding more and more and more to your already full plate. But if there's parts of it that are better suited to someone else, that's the beauty of talents and strengths, is understanding what we do well, what others do well, and how we can work well better together.
Yeah.
This being well-rounded notion, I feel like it's just dumb. Like let's not be well-rounded. You can know a little bit about everything, but can we do our best to focus on those places where we can really excel for
Yeah.
ourselves and our team?
Yeah. And I would take that point one step further. I think this is a place where you and I are a little bit on the same page, but I have a slightly different take, which is the job descriptions need to be revisited regularly and updated accordingly. Because if there are parts that you're just not doing anymore, or you've figured out an efficient way to essentially auto run that part of your job description so that you then
Yeah.
have the bandwidth to do something else, then that previous point should be taken off, not added to.
Agreed.
It should be taken off. In preparation for this, I was looking to try and find, what are the stats around, how many people feel that their job descriptions are accurate, or how many people feel
Mm.
like they've been updated recently. And interestingly, the data points I was finding were from well before the pandemic. So I was like, well, these aren't really relevant anymore. Well, one of the big threads that did run through a lot of the sources I did sort of preview is that there seems to be a lot of people that the job descriptions are not being reviewed until the next posting, the next
Oh
time
yeah.
somebody's hired into the role. And I think that's a missed opportunity. And this goes, we'll probably touch upon this a little bit when we start talking about what leaders can do differently. But in terms of just if you're in a role right now and you're not actively engaging in a conversation with your manager about what your job description looks like, that's a missed opportunity. And it's also a missed opportunity for the team and for the organization because they could be better utilizing you based on your talents, based on what you've gotten really good at, what you've been able to practice based on your talents and your strengths. So I would just come back around to the fact that our job descriptions need to be reviewed so much more frequently, but they also need to be co-defined. I think if we're talking about people coming into roles, yes, it's okay if the company or the team has a general job description. Maybe that was the basis of the interview process or the external job posting. That's fine. But when the person's finally hired, that's a fantastic opportunity for the manager and the person that's just been hired to sit down and be like, okay, we started with this as like a template. There were 5 or 7 things on here that were really key to us. Which ones do you really think are like super engaging to you, or you really think you can sell at? And then what other parts do we maybe need to job shift? And this is why we included the phrase job shaping in our title.
Mm-hmm.
The job crafting is, can there be parts of that job description that maybe go to somebody else because that energizes them? And then when we find an uneven exchange of, well, maybe there's something that they aren't super thrilled about doing, that comes over into a new job, a revised job description for the new hire. What an awesome
Yeah.
opportunity to build engagement, excitement about the role,
Mm-hmm.
feel like people have a hand in things, and to your point, eliminate a lot of the assumptions of, oh, this
Yes.
is the way the job has always been done, and we're going to assume that it's going to stay the same. No, the world of work is changing darn too fast for that to be the case anymore. So, sorry, I've gone on and on, but I
Oh,
just
I love it.
I get a little passionate about the job shaping, especially as the more I've become a coach and seen how people can accelerate their performance, their contributions to team. If you start thinking about the parts of the job that don't energize them, yes, there are going to be some parts
Right.
that are always going to be not your favorite thing to do. But can you shift the balance of that from, say, 50-50 to 70-30, where you're
Right.
70% that you're really excited about and 30% that it's just the logistical work of making work, and it's never anybody's fun grunt work
Right.
to do. So just how can you shift, job shape the role so that people are more engaged and more fulfilled in doing the work? So, sorry, I'm going on. What
And
What are your thoughts as I
no,
talk?
well, so many things. So one that I want to touch on that you just said was that now you're hired. So let's talk about what this looks like for you and how, the parts of it that you're most excited. I love that because it's bringing that individualization from each person. We all are going to bring our own like talents and strengths to this, our own abilities and skills. So what are those and what do those look like for us in that role? And then the other part that you said that I really like is the like revisiting that job description, because you're right. So many times they don't touch it. Like, you were hired for this, 12 years ago, which I know that doesn't really happen nowadays as much, but for those people who were hired in that role 12 years ago and now you're done and they need to replace you today, that job, absolutely. I don't care if you're doing the same thing, something about that job has actually changed. The technology around it, there's all kinds of other things that you might be doing today that you weren't doing, that wasn't on that original job description back from 12 years ago. So important to keep updating those. The other place it made me go, Chad, and I didn't expect this, so I'm kind of excited and thinking maybe we should do an episode around this, is when you're so good at that job description that you were, when you were hired, how do you get promoted, make more money, have a bigger job description, something that morphs you into that, like growing in that role without transitioning to a manager? Because that's typically the path, right? To go from like great individual contributor to now you're the manager of all the doers. What if you love that individual contributor role? Is that the only way you can make more money is to manage people? So I would love if we can like come back to that topic at some point, because that's one of the things about being strengths developed and strength based leaders, companies, businesses, like to understand what happens with those roles as we continue to grow and morph. That isn't the old school, like, oh, now you're the manager and then you're the COO and then you're the, the next things. But that just triggered me. And so I wanted to like bring that around, but I would love to have that conversation.
Yeah. So I'll share an initial thought for our listeners right now, and then Jen and I will get together and figure out if we're going to do an episode on the awesome idea Jen just had. But I think that is part of the necessary conversation. I think you bring up a really good point that leaders are missing out on not having that conversation, because as people develop, we coach people and we are always encouraging them to develop their talents, increase that profitability, increase their productivity, help with their employee engagement so that them actually staying benefits the company financially long term, because they're more engaged and they stay
have
longer.
All this information about the company, all this stuff you can't just learn.
Right. And so going to your point of how do you take that conversation and then make it about professional development, I think this gets into one of the other big conversations that people need to have is those professional development conversations, not annual reviews anymore, but professional development conversations. And maybe this job crafting conversation is part of that, or maybe it's two different conversations, but they should be tied together. But I think that's where that comes in, is that you review the job description, you talk about where they're developing, but then when it comes to the money side, or developing them or figuring out what their role title is, that's where you go, okay, what's the impact that person's having on the organization? Oh, look, they've saved us $500,000 in the last 6 months. Maybe we return some of that to their salary. Not all of it, obviously, it'd be nice, but let's be realistic.
Right.
But even part of that, can you give them a $10,000, $20,000 pay bump and a higher title because they've gotten so much more efficient, or they've figured out fantastic ways to do their roles that is having an impact in customers or the clients that they serve, or from my old industry in higher ed, are you serving the students better so that you're retaining more students, therefore your income stream is a little bit more steady. So I think there are a lot of different ways to explore that from the conversation we're having here about job descriptions onto the professional development side. They're intertwined, but they are two different conversations. I think one of the other things I just want to add about this conversation piece, there are some other points that I would add to that conversation. Things like, what are the behaviors and norms? How are you, if you're my manager, how am I best interacting with you? How am I best communicated to? If you need to give me information or need to give me feedback or give me recognition, what's the norm? How's that best communicated to me so that you get the most out of me, and vice versa? I think that there's also a really good conversation to be had around tools and resources. We know from the Q12, one of the other big questions is, I have the materials and equipment to do my job best. I may have some really great ideas coming into the say I'm a new hire. I may have some really great ideas about the tools and resources that I'm going to go to, but maybe you as the employer say, well, these are our, blue chip systems that we've always used. We've used them for the last 30 years, and we're going to keep using them. You need to get familiar with that. Well, then how do you manage those conflicts? If me as a new hire, I'm comfortable with tools A, B, and C, but you're asking me to use D, E, and F, that's a conversation to be had. Can there be a blend? What does that look like? How do we do it so that nobody feels offended?
Or let's look at both to see what works best. Right. Because this might be an opportunity to, grow the company. You're bringing in those people, hopefully as a yin and yang relationship. You're hoping to bring in new blood, let's say, to rejuvenate what's going on in the workforce, bringing in some new ideas. It's how we learn new things.
And I think the last point to that I would just bring in is, what are the cadences of connection, feedback, recognition? Do I need that every month? Do I need that every week? The research says every 7 days. I've had some people I've coached say, well, I don't need it that frequently. But if you want to send me, a recognition little piece every 14 days or every month or something that's all encapsulating, great. But have a conversation, because, again, to your point about assumptions, I may assume, hey, I'm going to get recognition every 7 days. You may be working on the assumption of you may only need it every month. Okay, well, now we've got a disconnect. And disconnection leads to disengagement. So I just think that there needs to be a two-way street about, sort of the job description is a core piece, but the larger circle is all those behaviors and agreed to tools and resources and cadences and, what's appropriate here in this workplace. So just put that out there as this is one of the reasons why we're having this conversation is we've seen it, we've experienced it ourselves. We'd like other people to avoid the challenging moments that you and I have had.
Let's move on to strength stuff. I think it flows really perfectly into, we start with a cookie cutter, a specific job description. These are the things that we need to get done, but we're not cogs, we're people. So as we are looking at doing the job, we each have unique abilities, and we should be utilizing our own and our team's strengths to do what we need to do better together. And I think from my individual contributor role, where I'm speaking to you guys, you individual contributors, I think the best way strengths can help is by helping us learn to communicate better with each other. So whether it's, between you and your teammate, you and your manager, or even you and customers, if you know and understand those parts of your role that you can use to your and others' benefit, it's really important for you to be able to share what that is, what that looks like, and then also what you might need in order to get on board with something. So I have a few examples, if you'll allow me.
Oh, yes? Love it.
Okay. All right, let's start with relationship building. So I'm thinking if you have high empathy, you may fully understand what your team is going through on a deep level, that no one has said anything. They don't even have to say anything. You are feeling it. You know who's being left out. You know who's being misunderstood. And you know when we might need to slow things down to bring the team together, really to focus on whatever this goal might be. Charging on without the team cohesiveness can make you, as your high empathy, it can make you really uneasy. So if we transfer that into the executing, let's say you're the high achiever, you're the one who's looking to charge through. You may like to be busy, that you like to work, you like to check things off your list, and pulling away from the work for meetings or other, let's even say fun having, we're going to have I don't want to say it, but forced fun, where work wants you to do something. It's supposed to bring us all together. They want you to stop working to go and do that. That might actually be frustrating to you as an achiever. Yeah. Okay. And then if we go into strategic thinking, I'm going to pick on strategic because I don't have it. So you may love having those meetings, getting all the ideas out there and like working through like determining like what's our best path forward, communicating exactly what that path looks like and exact steps to take may not come as easy for you. And then if we reach on to influencing, I'm going to pick on command here. So if you're high in command, you may feel so at ease with leading the charge, quickly picking up and leading your group, helping others get on board with an idea, and dealing with the relational side of things may really drain you. So you could see where all four of these together, like if these were our 4 team members and they're leading with these things, you can see how they absolutely need one another. And this is where I think it's really important. We do this work with our clients all the time, is really understanding and being able to communicate what our talent brings, that is what we do that contributes to the team, and then also what our talents need, what we really need to be able to do our best work. And that's where being able to have these conversations, understanding yourself, what you need, what you bring, understanding your teammates, what they bring, what they need, you can really get to this point where we can really work cohesively together. But if you're not having any of these conversations and you're just leaving it up to assumptions, it's that old saying they say about assuming. A donkey out of you and me, right?
Right. Hey, some great examples. What struck me about that was how different the conversation would be between those people, each of those people and their manager around what's going to energize them about their job, how to even write their job description. As I was thinking, we mentioned about practical steps. I'm going to take Jen's awesome notes here and take it one step further. I'd encourage leaders to start thinking about how do you refine, if you're redoing the job description, how do you refine that job description to speak to that person's talents and strengths? So again, I'm going to keep it a little bit more general, just talking about, sort of relationship focused talents. Are there statements in that job description that say, build connections with or collaborate with, all those that are about building community and interaction versus executing side that you were starting to highlight, where it's thoughtfully complete or execute this program or accomplish. That's going to speak to your activators, your achievers, your even deliberatives or high responsibility. I am responsible for this. I will accomplish X. You change the language, you change the way that person interacts or understands their job because you're now speaking a language. It goes to your brings and needs. Yeah. It's telling them. It's reframing it around, well, we recognize that this is what you bring. We're going to recognize that in the language of your job description. How powerful is that as a tool if you're talking about employee engagement and wanting to keep people on? Hey, I've got a job description that's not a cookie cutter. It was written for me. And so influencing, improve, build external connections with, direct, all very influencing language, again, to speak to the people that have those talents. And then strategic thinking, big picture language, right? Envision a new plan for this program or offer analysis and synopsis of this massive data set. Okay, you're speaking their language. So I love your examples. I just want to add in that language part. Use language that speaks to those awesome talent themes that you just highlighted.
Yeah. I love that, Chad.
I think the other thing, this again goes to your points about understand the brings and needs. I've been in situations both on sort of the hiring team side, where I already have the job and we're hiring in a new person, but also being the new hire, where you get a job description and, there might be, say, 12 things that are all bulleted, major responsibilities, and they list, 10 or 12 of them. I think there needs to be some understanding, again, both sides, and this needs to be a two-way street, but that the person coming into that role might be energized because of their talent themes on points, A, D, F, G, and H, right? And then another person is going to be like B, C, E, H, and I.
Right.
they're going to be energy. And so I started to mention this before of there needs to be parts of that job description that the team or the manager needs to be comfortable saying, hey, can we shift this to somebody else? Or can this be deprioritized? And to what extent? Again, it needs to be a conversation. I'm not
Yes.
saying that the employee has, full reign to start, redlining their own job
Wouldn't
description.
wouldn't that be awesome if we could just be like, nope, not doing that. I hate it. Like,
Yeah,
obviously that's not realistic.
yeah. So I think, but I think that that's the conversation, though, right? That
Yes.
we need to have the discussion of my strengths help me do this, and then going back to that, this needs to be an ongoing conversation. 6 months or every year, or hopefully not too much further beyond a year,
Right.
but that say, hey, over the past year, I've had an opportunity to build, say, my learners talent. That's my number one theme. Um, I really have excelled in this area. I really want to keep making an impact in that area. Is that a job component that gets expanded, almost to your point about the professional development? How do I make a further
Right. Yeah.
impact and a bigger impact? But having that conversation of what gets re thought about or expanded or maybe shrinks a little bit, or hey, I haven't had much opportunity to use my talent theme in this area. Maybe that's not the best area for me to contribute in. Again, can there be an opportunity to, maybe somebody's itching to take that off my job responsibility plate and would prefer to add it to theirs.
Yeah.
I will say one of the interesting components I found in my research in getting ready for this whole job descriptions conversation is there's actually no legal requirement to have job descriptions.
Oh,
It was
okay.
a surprising find for me. Now, this is not to say that everybody listening just needs to go tear up their job descriptions. It can be really helpful for making sure that you're in compliance with things like ADA and um, uh, other legal frameworks. And I'm not experienced enough to speak to all of them. But it does open up the conversation of, well, some people think, or some leaders that I've come across seem to think, well, the job description is a job description. It's a legally binding document. It has to stay the way it is. That's not true.
Okay.
And so there is a far bigger opportunity that I think a lot of leaders and a lot of individual contributors are leaving on the table by not having this conversation. Thinking that the job description is written in stone is not true.
Good.
Um,
I think
as
I think
long
that's
as,
good for
yeah,
leaders and for individual contributors to hear. If you can
yeah.
start that conversation, what a great place to grow and build that trust between the two.
Yeah. It definitely helps, if there's any confusion about what you should be working on, then you have a shared document. But as
Yeah.
long as that's been code-defined together, you're even more in
Right.
alignment than you would have been had you just left it as thinking it was set in stone. So I just
Yeah.
wanted to mention that before we got too much further along. Um,
Awesome.
so as we think about other things leaders could be doing or things that they can be
Yes.
checking with their HR department about, what are some things that you think leaders should be doing better around setting expectations and job crafting and
Sure.
sort of taking what we've talked about and sort of putting it into action for some of our leaders?
Yeah. Well, you're making me switch my perspective now because I've been thinking about that individual contributor, that team member. So now to think about the leader. I think the kinds of thought that around this job description really needs to start at, maybe even before a new employee begins. So like defining what the responsibilities are that are needed. What are those things? Making sure that you have processes and procedures in place. Like what are those things now? So that way when you're talking about them, what everyone else is like. If this is filling another job, what everybody else is using. What are your kind of normal everyday things that you have to help this person do that job? And then reviewing, like you said, I love that idea of reviewing the employees' talents and skills. So whether that's the rest of the people on the team and seeing like, okay, well now we see where everyone is and kind of what everyone else is doing. So that's helpful to know before you even hire someone new. And then making sure you have that alignment, either one-on-one and the team, is to really involve the team in creating those expectations of that role. So if everyone's kind of got the same role on the team, what does that look like across people? Like you were saying, you might be able to 70-30 it for this person and then 50-50 it for somebody else because they like doing more of what you didn't. And so you want to do like only 30% of that, and then I think really importantly would be to create the space for these conversations and the alignment to actually happen. Physically setting out the space, like you on your calendar in a meeting room where we're talking about the role. And I think it's really key for the team to do that before a person starts that, before a new person joins the team. But maybe even just as important to have it again once the new person starts, to have them understand how things work now and how they fit into the picture. I think you and I had heard that in at the Gallup Summit. It was one of my most favorite things. The All Blacks, right? Was it
Oh, yes.
the
Yep.
team, and when they get a new player to the team, they actually like learn all about that player. Then they go through like what with the history of the team and the great things that have happened, and then why they chose you. What was so amazing about you that they chose you to be part of this team, and then like how they see your involvement growing and making the team even better. I'm thinking like along those lines with a manager doing that with a new employee, with the team, with existing employees who are already there, having that conversation again, about where they've come, how they've done all these great things for the team already. And then like kind of oh my gosh, like look at all the places we could go with this. So I think that's maybe where I want to stop. I know there's lots of questions I would ask the manager to ask, but I think you and I overlap there a little bit. So I'm gonna pause on my questions and let you share what you feel like a manager can really help and support. Unless you want to comment on any of my things.
No, so you've already touched on a few of the things that I was going to say about managers. I think one that I'm going to harp on again that I've already mentioned is that the review, it's got to be at least annual, if not more. The annual has got to be a minimum. Technology is moving too fast, but is moving fast.
Always.
The way the world works, just in general, is quickening. And so, if you've got job descriptions that you haven't looked at in 5 years, sorry, you need to that's a whole other conversation. That needs to be a task that you need to do, within the next month. Like pull those out, look at them. Do they actually represent the work that's actually subject? But in terms of this conversation, in terms of setting expectations, I think you need to review those annually, update them if you found, whether it's the job description or the expectations. We kind of talked about those two circles, the job description sort of being the core, defining what that role is, and then all those other components around it, the cadences, the behaviors, the norms, the technology, the resources. Look at that. Dissect that. Have you abandoned certain tools in favor of something newer? I was just reading a LinkedIn post yesterday. Some people are starting to abandon Microsoft Excel, which has been the bedrock of analysis for a lot of the AI, which can take massive spreadsheets and do the analysis for you. Okay, if that's going to be the threat, the trend over the next year or 3, what does that mean for putting Microsoft Excel in the job description? That's irrelevant, in 3 years.
Right.
So I just, talking about the tools and resources on an ongoing basis, what is and isn't appropriate and what is and isn't the expectation. Again, eliminating refining those assumptions, right? Taking the assumptions and making them implicit instead of sort of vaguely understood.
Right.
Sorry, explicit instead of implicit.
Yes.
Sorry, I got my words flipped around. So I think that's one. I think, to your point about job shaping, you just talked about that beautifully. How can you switch up roles across people? I think the other point that we really haven't talked a ton about, but probably needs to be part of the conversation, is clarifying, again, making explicit the connection between the job description and the goals that need to be achieved. I think that's a real key factor for the leaders. If you have certain goals for the team or for that specific role, how does that job take part in that? So an analogy from the sports realm is we want to win a game. That's the goal. Okay. Well, the goalie I've put in net isn't necessarily shooting on the opponent's net all that often. What is his role in helping us win? Well, it's to defend to the best of his or her ability our net so that goals aren't going in on the other end, our on our end, so that we have fewer opponent goals than we have our goals.
Right.
How do you define somebody's role as helping you achieve the goal?
Yeah.
Um, and then the other part that I think is really important, and you and I have talked about this sort of offline in our own professional connections, about sort of the purpose of a user manual for
Yes.
both the employee and the manager. The manager, in particular, should have essentially a user's manual. What are their brings? What are their needs? How do you best fulfill those needs? What are their communication styles? Um, what are their pet peeves and frustrations? So you make sure you keep the number of frustrations down. Um, so I think that from a leader sharing that with their individual contributors, especially as they come on board, it would be really key. Now, hopefully, the leader can also help the individual contributor develop, if they don't already have one, a user manual for that employee, that individual contributor, so that the individual contributor can share that with the people they interact with. Be like, hey, this is what I bring, this is what I need. You highlighted that really well. But also, what pisses them off? How do you not frustrate me? How do you best communicate with me? Is it Slack? Is it email? Is it pick up the phone and just talk to me? That's a big component that leaders should be really leaning into is how do you communicate such a user's manual?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love that idea of that user's manual because whether you're the team member or the team leader, having the information, if you're a team leader, having the information about each of your team, each of the people on your team, it can help you so much with having some of the conversations. Not some of them, all of the conversations you're going to have, because now you know what it is that they're good at, the things that frustrate them, that make them in a bad mood, that, I'm thinking back to our activator episode where I'm talking about, like, people are talking about lunch and what they're going to have for lunch, and we're in the middle of an important meeting and I have things to do, and I'm starting to get like, I'm going to go green, I'm going to Hulk out because we're not getting things done. I think understanding that about each other, for a manager to understand it about a teammate to understand it about each other, those things are so key. And it's just breaking down all those barriers that we put up where, we could just be honest and open with one another, know what to expect, and then know what's expected of us. So I love this conversation.
Yeah. I'm going to bring what you just said, right back around to the other statement that you shared at the very beginning, which is, it not only breaks down the walls, but it clarifies the assumptions. It essentially takes those assumptions, pulls them apart, and makes sure that, like, okay, we're assuming the right things and the same things about one another, right, so that we don't end up making a mess of things. You said the donkey out of you and me. Having a user's manual prevents the donkey from even showing up. So
yes, poor donkeys.
Yeah. So I really appreciate your thought there, and it just goes back around to the point that you made so poignantly at the beginning of, we come with all these assumptions, and yet none of this is written down, none of this is communicated readily at the beginning of a connection, or a team interaction. And this is what leaders can do differently. They can clear a lot of that fog up and get it down. And get it down. So, this has been fantastic episode. I hope this has been enlightening to our listeners. Jen, did you have any wrap up thoughts or something that you'd want to come back to? Because I sort of reemphasize that review annually and job shape, making sure that we're communicating on our talents. But is there anything you wanted to wrap us up with?
I think I have just one thought, and it goes along along the lines of, reviewing and revisiting that job description. If you are an individual contributor and you were hired so many years ago, and you see or notice that you are doing things different, doing different things, you have made some progress, take a moment to look at your job description or maybe write a new one today. Like, what is your job description today? This is a place, sorry, managers, they're coming at you. This is a place you can go to your manager and say, these are the things I do now. Maybe it's time to look at how much I get paid. So just putting it out there.
No,
when you are doing and bringing what you do to your best to the team, I think you are absolutely within your right to be rewarded correctly for that. So if you see lots of growth and you haven't seen lots of growth in your paycheck, this is maybe a place where you could start that conversation.
Yeah. I don't want to intrude too much on that awesome wrap up. I think that's a great statement. I would just add the one small thing of, because you've developed your talents and your strengths in relation to, you've expanded your impact of your job description and how that's worked out. That's the only piece that I would just add to your awesome, Jen, that's fantastic to end with that of,
thanks.
Bringing that job description back out and looking at it again. Beautiful point. So
we got to advocate for ourselves.
Yes,
and
we
managers,
do.
You need to advocate for yourself as well. You may not be just checking people's time cards anymore or approving vacations. You're doing different things now, having conversations with people to make sure that they're developed and growing. So, okay, this goes for you too. Like, look at your job descriptions and maybe get to your upline to find out what that means for you in your role.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. So I will just say, in that vein, if this has been an encouraging conversation to you, if you have found this helpful as you consider this episode, I'm going to be the first one that keeps encouraging you to keep playing to your strengths, because this is what this whole conversation has been all about.
And always be uniquely you.
If you like this episode, we encourage you to like, follow, and subscribe to wherever you find your podcasts.